On a crisp autumn day in the village of Woolpit, Suffolk, sometime in the 1100s, the hard-working local farmers were harvesting their crops when an unexpected event made them look up from the rows of wheat, barley, oats and beans that had been nurtured in the area's moist, loamy soil for the past several months. The 12th century was a time of feudalism and strict class hierarchies that separated landowners from the peasants who worked the fields, a period of castle building, flourishing religion and monasticism. Market towns in the region gained prominence as early urbanisation and economic development gathered pace. Norwich rose in importance, the wool trade promised greater prosperity, and ports like King's Lynn became trading hubs, all amid royal plots and political unrest, as King Stephen and Empress Matilda vied for the throne. Life was hard, its periods of peace interspersed with bouts of violence, uncertainty and hunger. But in the slow-moving world of the Middle Ages, daily life remained mostly monotonous. So the farmers of Woolpit were taken by surprise when two children of mysterious origin appeared among their crops, their bodies entirely green. I'm your host Prash, and this is Curious Britain. Woolpit was a small agrarian village centred around a marketplace with timber-framed houses, shops and a church. According to the Domesday Book, it was home to just 270 people, and it got its name from the wolf pits dug to trap wolves, which still roamed freely in England at that time, although today those pits are flooded. The village may once have been the old Roman town of Cytomagus, suggested by Woolpit's ancient brick kilns, as the Romans were known for their skilled brickmaking. When the farmers spotted two children among their crops, their bodies completely green, they were startled and perhaps even a little fearful, as in those days anything unknown, including the arrival of strangers, was often met with suspicion. The children, a girl and a boy, wore clothing made from an unfamiliar material. They looked bewildered, and the harvesters took them to the village, where people gathered to witness the strange sight. The pair refused to eat anything, despite appearing close to collapse from hunger. The villagers offered them food, but they rejected everything except for fresh green beans brought from the fields. The children eagerly examined the stalks, looking for the beans inside, but wept with disappointment when they found none. A kind man showed them how to open the pods to get at the little peas inside, and the youngsters gratefully began to eat. Not knowing what to do with the children, who spoke an unrecognisable language, the villagers gave them shelter in Woolpit, and some accounts suggest they were taken in by local knight Sir Richard de Cowney. For several months they consumed nothing but green beans, but eventually began to accept bread, and as they did, their green colouring gradually faded. In time, they learned English and were able to communicate with the locals, explaining that they had come from the land of St. Martin. They didn't know exactly where this was, but remembered that while tending their father's flock one day, they heard a clamorous ringing of bells. As they listened to the sound, they suddenly found themselves in Woolpit, surrounded by puzzled farmers. When questioned, they claimed their land was a Christian one, with churches, but that the sun never rose there, so the light there was always dim. They also described a shining land visible in the distance, with a broad river separating it from their own. The Woolpit villagers decided to baptise the children, but the boy, who appeared to be the younger of the two, died soon afterwards. The girl, however, adapted well to her new life and remained in good health, working as a servant to the knight who had taken them in, and later marrying a man from King's Lynn, about 45 miles to the north. Throughout her life, she never changed her story, insisting that all the inhabitants of her homeland were green, and never changing the details of how she came to arrive in Woolpit. The story of the Green Children of Woolpit comes primarily from two sources. The first was William of Newburgh, an Augustinian priest from Yorkshire who lived from 1136 to 1198. He implied that the event occurred during King Stephen's reign, placing it between 1135 and 1154, and admitted that he was initially reluctant to believe the extraordinary tale. He eventually accepted it, saying, "I do not regret writing down these astounding events. The story is too strange and complicated for human intelligence to unravel." Later, in the 1220s, Ralph of Coggeshall, an abbot from a Cistercian monastery in Essex, also recorded the strange incident, though he didn't specify the exact year. Apparently, he had heard the story from Sir Richard de Cowney himself, but his version differed slightly from William of Newburgh's. For example, Ralph wrote that the children had followed the sound of bells into a cavern, which they entered, eventually emerging at the mouth of a pit in the fields, where they were found, disorientated by the bright sunlight and warmth, which was so different from their own world. Over the centuries, more accounts added extra details, such as the girl later taking the name Agnes, but all were based on these two early sources, and the core of the story remained the same. 17th century writer Robert Burton theorised that the children had fallen from the moon, while later interpretations from the 20th and 21st century had them coming from another planet altogether. In 1998, writer Paul Harris from the Fortean Times magazine proposed a more earthly explanation, that they were the children of Flemish immigrants, which would account for their unfamiliar language and clothing. At the time, the term Flemish referred to people from Flanders, a region that today lies mostly in Belgium, though the country itself didn't exist yet. Flemish people, or Flemings, spoke a Dutch dialect, and many had come to England during the 12th century, some as skilled weavers and others as refugees from war. As for their green colouring, Burton suggested it could have been caused by chlorosis or green sickness, brought on by malnutrition and iron deficiency. A British newspaper from 1926 wrote this about the condition. Chlorosis is a special form of anemia. It was commonly known as the green sickness, owing to the peculiar green tinge of the skin in addition to the usual paleness. Young women and girls between the ages of 14 and 21 are liable to it, though occasionally it is found in boys. 20 years ago it was quite common and to be seen frequently, but now it has almost disappeared. The same paper advertised Dr. Castle's iron tablets as a treatment, but an improved diet could also reduce the symptoms. If the green sickness was still a problem in the late 1800s, it was very likely prevalent in the Middle Ages, when quality nutrition was out of reach for society's poorest, and heavily dependent on the success or failure of crops. The people of 12th century Woolpit would undoubtedly have seen plenty of pale or sickly children suffering from the effects of hard living and poor diets, but they probably wouldn't have understood these conditions in medical terms. If the children's greenish tint was particularly pronounced, then combined with their strange language and sudden appearance, it might have created an atmosphere that felt deeply unsettling or even otherworldly. Robert Burton's theory might be plausible, as there was a village called Farnham St Martin just 8 miles from Woolpit. Could this be the St Martin's land the children spoke of? Many Flemish people died there in 1173 in a battle fought during an uprising against the king, and if the children's parents were among the dead, it might explain why no one came looking for them. But there are a couple of problems. The Battle of Farnham St Martin took place nearly 20 years after King Stephen's reign, which throws off the timeline recorded by William of Newburgh. Also, although 8 miles was a significant distance in medieval times when travel was slow and mostly by foot or horse and cart, it's still close enough that residents of Woolpit would almost certainly have been aware of it and would probably have heard the Flemish language due to the presence of immigrants in the region. Intriguingly, a similar story exists in Spanish folklore. Agricultural workers in Baños, Catalonia, reportedly discovered 2 children crying at the entrance to a cave. They spoke a strange language, wore clothing made of an unfamiliar fabric in unusual colours, and, just like the Woolpit children, their skin was green. They too went hungry for several days before finally eating beans. The boy died soon after, but the girl survived and learnt enough Spanish to tell them about their home, which mirrored the tale from Woolpit. A land with a permanent dim, dusky twilight, a wide river, and a glimpse of a brighter country beyond. A loud ringing of bells had also preceded their arrival. According to the story, the girl lost her green colouring over time but died 5 years later. Did the Woolpit legend somehow travel to Spain, where it was translated, retold and adopted into their oral history, either deliberately or simply by being repeated many times? Or could an identical incident really have taken place there too? Some believe the Green Children of Woolpit made the whole story up. After all, there were inconsistencies. If their land was truly so dark, how did grass grow for their father's animals to graze? Others suggest the chroniclers were mistaken. It's possible their accounts were based on the same source, or that one borrowed from the other. Ralph of Coggeshall, however, lived much closer to Woolpit than William of Newburgh, so his version is perhaps more likely to reflect local knowledge. Curiously, neither chronicler recorded the children's names. More fanciful theories suggest that the children were of alien origin, fairies or even members of an underground race who lived beneath the earth and accidentally found their way to the surface. Skeptics have also proposed that exposure to copper mines might have caused their green skin, but there were no copper mines in East Anglia, with the nearest at least 250 miles away in the Lake District, Wales or Devon. With so few surviving records and so many centuries having passed, we are only left to speculate. Today, Woolpit remains a small, tranquil village, though its population has grown to around 2,000. A picturesque blend of rural life and modern convenience, it hasn't forgotten its mysterious past. The sign that welcomes visitors to the village still depicts two green children standing hand in hand beside a church, while a wolf looks on. A quiet tribute to Woolpit's long and fascinating history, and one of England's strangest pieces of folklore.
You've been listening to Curious Britain. This show is run by a husband and wife team, me, Melissa, and my husband Prash, and we do all the research, writing, narration and audio production ourselves. There's so much to learn about these ancient isles. Britain is full of myth, legend, history and mystery, so we spend our spare time exploring the enthralling and little-known stories of the nation's heritage so we can bring them to you. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a comment or review, or join us on Patreon to get ad-free episodes, bonus content and help the podcast grow. Join us again next time as we continue to celebrate everything that's curious about Britain.